When I bought my home, I never expected that peace and quiet would come at such a high cost, or rather, that someone else would try to make me pay for peace and quiet I already owned. It wasn't just any neighborly annoyance I was dealing with. No, this was something far worse. It was Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of our neighborhood. She ran the hoe across the street like it was her personal kingdom, and she believed every single property within a 5-mile radius should bow down to her rules. The thing is, I didn't live in her hoe. My house was outside of it, technically, legally, and completely separate. But Karen didn't care much about technicalities or reality, for that matter. The first time I met her, it was under the worst possible circumstances. I had just moved in, barely a week into settling down. My driveway still had unpacked boxes stacked up. My front yard looked rough from the moving trucks, and my garage was a disaster zone. That's when Karen strutted over in her pastel cardigan, clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched on her nose like a judge peering over her glasses at a guilty criminal. She didn't knock. She didn't ring. She just walked right up as I was setting down a box and said, "Excuse me, but you're violating hoe policy with those boxes on the lawn." I blinked. "Sorry? What?" She tapped her pen on the clipboard, lips pursed. "Homeowners Association regulations. No clutter on the lawn, no garage doors left open, no trash visible. You're in violation. I'll be issuing a notice." I laughed, not to be rude, but because I genuinely thought she was joking. "Ma'am, I'm not in the hoe. This property isn't part of your association." Her face tightened like I'd just cursed her out. "Every property on this street is under my jurisdiction. That house," she jabbed her pen toward my freshly purchased home, "was supposed to be part of the hoe, but somehow the paperwork fell through. I don't care what your deed says. Everyone here follows the rules." I stared at her, stunned. "Look, with all due respect, you can't enforce rules on me. I bought this house because it's not in the hoe. I don't have to follow your regulations." Karen leaned in slightly, her perfume hitting me like a wall. "We'll see about that." That was the beginning of what became the most drawn-out war of my life. At first, I thought it was just an idle threat. Hoe Karens bark all the time, but usually they don't have the teeth to bite outside their own fences. But Karen had something to prove. Within 2 days, I received an envelope taped to my door. No postage, no official letterhead, just a piece of paper that read, "Notice of violation, boxes on lawn. $100 fine, overgrown grass. $50 fine, garbage visible from street. $75 fine, total due. $225. Please remit payment to Treasurer." Karen's name was scrawled at the bottom. I laughed again, but this time it wasn't amused laughter. It was the kind of laugh you make when you can't believe someone is that bold. I crumpled the paper and tossed it in the trash. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. The next week, another notice appeared. Then another, and another, each one more aggressive than the last. The fines started piling into the thousands: $3,000, $4,500, even $6,000. She accused me of having improper window treatments, unapproved exterior paint, and even non-standard roofing shingles. For the record, the house came with the roof. It wasn't even mine to choose. She claimed my mailbox was unapproved, my car was illegally parked, and my dog, a 10-pound terrier, was an unlicensed danger to the community. Every notice went straight to the trash. But Karen wasn't just trying to intimidate me with fake fines. She started a smear campaign. Whenever I pulled into the driveway, I'd see her standing with 2 or 3 of her hoe lackeys, whispering and pointing. She'd march up to neighbors who waved at me and hiss something in their ear until they stopped waving the next day. One family that had invited me to a barbecue suddenly rescinded their invitation. It became clear Karen was poisoning the neighborhood against me. Still, I kept my head down. I figured she'd get bored eventually. But then, one afternoon, a manila envelope arrived in the actual mail. This one was official. Inside was a lawsuit. Karen, acting on behalf of the hoe, was suing me for over $20,000 in unpaid fines and demanding that I either join the hoe or face foreclosure on my house. I nearly dropped the papers. Foreclosure? For an HOA I'm not even in? That night, I called a lawyer friend of mine. I expected him to laugh it off like I did, but instead, he sighed. Yeah, I've seen cases like this. HOAs sometimes overreach. They can't legally enforce fines on you if you're not a member, but they can drag you to court. It's harassment by bureaucracy. Don't worry, you're in the right. But it's going to be a fight, and so the war officially began. Karen strutted around after filing that lawsuit like she had already won. Every time she saw me, she smirked. One morning, as I was getting into my car, she called out, "Hope you've got a good lawyer. This neighborhood doesn't take kindly to freeloaders." Freeloader? I shot back. I paid for my house in full. I don't owe your hoe a dime. You'll see, she said, tapping that ever-present clipboard. The judge always sides with the hoe, always. I didn't respond. I just drove off, fists tight around the steering wheel. But deep down, something in me snapped. I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to dismantle her entire petty empire piece by piece. And I knew just where to start. The first court date was set for a month after I received the official notice. 30 days. That was how long I had to prepare for a battle I never asked for against an enemy who believed herself untouchable. Karen thought she had already won before I even showed up, but she didn't know me well enough yet. I don't back down, and when someone pushes me into a corner, I come out swinging. My lawyer, Dan, was an old college buddy. He wasn't flashy, no $1,000 suits, no dramatic theatrics, but he was sharp, patient, and methodical. The kind of guy who could dismantle an opponent piece by piece with nothing but facts and a calm tone. When I handed him the stack of fake violation notices Karen had taped to my door, his eyes lit up. "Oh, this is gold," he said, flipping through them. "She doesn't have a leg to stand on. These aren't even on whole letterhead. Half of them don't have signatures, and the ones that do are just hers. She's not even trying to hide the fact that this is personal harassment. So we're good then?" I asked. He gave me a small shrug. "We're good, but here's the thing. HOAs have money. They use it to hire aggressive lawyers who bury you in paperwork, hoping you'll give up or settle. She's banking on you not fighting back. But you are fighting back, and that's where she's going to trip up." I felt a surge of relief, but also a new kind of anger. Karen had dragged me into this with full expectation that I'd cave, that I'd roll over, write her a check, and beg forgiveness for not following her imaginary rules. That wasn't going to happen. The next few weeks, I gathered everything I could. My deed showing my property wasn't in the HOA. The original listing that proudly stated no HOA. Even an old county zoning map proving the neighborhood boundaries ended 3 lots away from my house. Every document was another nail in the coffin of her ridiculous lawsuit. Meanwhile, Karen ramped up her harassment. She doubled down on her smear campaign, knocking on doors and spreading lies about me. I overheard her once while I was taking out the trash. "He's trying to cheat the community. He doesn't pay dues, doesn't follow rules. If we let him get away with it, soon everyone will want to be exempt. Property values will plummet." Another time, she cornered me as I got my mail. "You know," she said with a saccharine smile, "it would be so much easier if you just wrote the check now. We could make this all go away quietly." I couldn't help myself, I laughed. "You're suing me for 20 grand and threatening foreclosure. That's not something that goes away quietly, Karen." Her smile faltered. "You'll regret this." The day of court finally arrived. I wore my best suit, not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because I knew Karen would try to make me look like some careless rebel who didn't respect authority. Dan was calm as always, carrying nothing but a slim briefcase. Karen, on the other hand, strutted in with her own lawyer and 2 HOA board members in tow, all of them dressed like they were auditioning for a corporate commercial. She sat at the plaintiff's table, chin high, smirking at me like the judge was already hers. The judge entered, a stern woman in her 50s who clearly had no patience for nonsense. After the formalities, Karen's lawyer launched into his speech. "Your Honor, this homeowner has repeatedly violated the bylaws of our community. He refuses to pay fines, ignores rules, and his negligence is a direct threat to property values in the neighborhood. We are seeking damages of $20,325 and an order compelling him to join the as his residence is within the boundaries of our association." Karen nodded along, smug, as if the words were gospel truth. Dan rose calmly when it was our turn. "Your Honor, with all due respect, my client is not, and has never been, part of this HOA. The property deed makes that abundantly clear. In fact, I have here," he held up a copy of the county records documentation proving the HOA's jurisdiction ends several houses away. "The plaintiff is attempting to enforce rules on a property over which she has zero legal authority. Not only is this case baseless, it borders on harassment." The judge took the papers, adjusting her glasses as she skimmed. Her eyebrows raised slightly. "Is this accurate? The defendant's property isn't within the HOA boundaries?" Karen's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "Your Honor, while technically that may be true, the intent of the HOA was always to include all houses on this street. It was an oversight in the original paperwork. However, fairness dictates that all neighbors follow the same rules." The judge cut him off. "Fairness is not the same as legality. If the property is not included in the HOA, then the HOA has no authority over it. Period." Karen leapt to her feet before her lawyer could stop her. "But Your Honor, he's destroying our neighborhood. His lawn, his boxes, his dog. It's all against policy." The judge turned her gaze on Karen, and for the first time, I saw a crack in her armor. "Ma'am, sit down. You will speak when spoken to. This is a courtroom, not a HOA board meeting." The gallery chuckled, and Karen's face turned red. Dan continued smoothly. "Furthermore, Your Honor, I'd like to submit these so-called violation notices. They were taped to my client's door. Not mailed. Not on official letterhead. Not signed by the HOA board, but by the plaintiff herself. She is personally attempting to collect thousands of dollars from my client under the guise of HOA authority she does not possess." He handed them over. The judge flipped through them, her expression darkening with each page. Finally, she set them down. "This is highly irregular. I'm inclined to agree this is harassment." Karen's lawyer tried to recover, but Karen couldn't hold her tongue. She shot up again. "You don't understand. If he gets away with this, the whole neighborhood will fall apart. He has to be part of the HOA." The judge slammed her gavel once. "Enough. Sit down, or I'll hold you in contempt." Silence fell over the room, but Karen's glare could have burned a hole through me. I thought the judge would end it there, dismiss the case, and let me go home. But instead, she leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowing. "I want to review the HOA charter itself. If what the defense is saying is true, then this lawsuit is not only frivolous, but the HOA may be operating outside its own authority." Dan smirked slightly. "Funny you should mention that, Your Honor. I've already obtained a copy." He slid the thick packet across the table. Karen's lawyer went pale. Karen herself sputtered. That's confidential." The judge shook her head. "Not when it pertains to a legal dispute. Court is adjourned until I've had time to review this thoroughly. But let me make one thing clear. I do not tolerate frivolous lawsuits, and I certainly do not tolerate abuse of authority. Consider your position carefully before we reconvene." The gavel struck again, and just like that, Part 1 of the war was over. Karen stormed out of the courtroom, her heels clacking like gunshots, muttering curses under her breath. As I followed behind with Dan, I caught the words, "This isn't over. I'll bury him." I almost laughed. She thought she was the predator, but in reality, she had just walked into her own trap. Because once the judge looked at that charter, she'd see the same thing Dan and I already knew. Karen's HOA had been operating illegally for years. And when that came to light, Karen's empire would crumble. When the judge adjourned that first hearing, I thought I'd finally have some breathing room. But I underestimated how far Karen was willing to go when her control was threatened. The very next morning, I woke up to find a new notice taped to my front door. This one wasn't about fines. Instead, it was a typed letter, bold font, all caps at the top. Notice of community action. The HOA has voted unanimously to pursue immediate enforcement of all neighborhood policies on your property. Failure to comply will result in further legal action, liens, and eventual foreclosure. Consider this your final warning. At the bottom, once again, was Karen's scrawled signature. No letterhead, no official seal, nothing that tied it to anyone but her. I crumpled the paper, but inside, I was boiling. She had just been humiliated in front of a judge, yet here she was doubling down, acting as if she could intimidate me into giving up. Dan wasn't surprised when I called him. Classic Karen move. She's trying to rattle you before the next hearing. Don't take the bait. Every one of these little stunts only makes our case stronger. Document everything. Save every scrap she gives you. So I started a folder. Every ridiculous notice. Every threatening letter. Every bizarre attempt at intimidation. I even began recording interactions on my phone whenever she confronted me in person. If Karen wanted a war of attrition, I was going to make sure every battle she picked ended up as ammunition against her. But it wasn't just me she was trying to manipulate. Karen called an emergency home meeting 2 nights later, and though I wasn't technically part of the association, word spread fast. A couple of neighbors who still liked me quietly told me what happened inside. She went on a whole rant about you. One neighbor whispered over the fence the next morning, said you're trying to ruin the community, that you bought the house on purpose to cause chaos. She even told people you're planning to open some kind of business here, like a car repair shop or something. I blinked. What? I don't even own a tool set beyond a hammer. Yeah, well, she's desperate. But not everyone's buying it anymore. People are starting to notice how obsessed she is with you. That was the first sign of a crack in Karen's empire. Her control had always come from fear. She thrived on bullying, intimidation, and the illusion of absolute authority. But now, her desperation was showing, and people were beginning to question whether she was really protecting the neighborhood, or just her own ego. A week later, we were back in court. This time, the judge came in with a thick binder of documents. She adjusted her glasses and wasted no time. I've reviewed the HOA charter, she said, her voice sharp and steady. And I have some serious concerns. According to this document, your association has been operating under bylaws that expired over a decade ago. Furthermore, the geographical boundaries outlined in your original charter do not, in fact, include the defendant's property. In short, you've been attempting to enforce authority you do not legally possess. The courtroom was dead silent. Karen's lawyer looked like he wanted to melt into his chair. Karen herself turned crimson, whispering furiously into his ear, but the judge raised a hand. Save it. I don't care what your intent was. The law is very clear. You cannot enforce HOA rules on properties outside your jurisdiction, and you certainly cannot fine or threaten foreclosure against homeowners who are not under your authority. This case is on thin ice. Dan leaned over and whispered. This is better than I could have hoped. Karen, unable to contain herself, shot up from her chair. But Your Honor, he's destroying everything we've built. If you don't make him follow the rules, what's going to stop everyone else from leaving the HOA? He'll drag us all down with him. The judge's eyes narrowed. Mrs. Watkins, Karen stiffened. She hated when people used her last name instead of President Watkins. Your concern for the HOA's survival does not justify illegal actions. If your neighbors want to dissolve the HOA or leave it, that is their right under state law. You cannot force participation through intimidation. The gavel struck once, echoing through the courtroom. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks to finalize my decision. In the meantime, I strongly suggest you cease all attempts to contact or fine the defendant. If I hear of further harassment, there will be consequences. I walked out of that courtroom lighter than I'd felt in months. Karen, on the other hand, stormed past me with her entourage, muttering something about appeals and higher courts. She didn't look like a queen anymore. She looked like a cornered animal. But here's the thing about cornered animals, they bite. The harassment didn't stop. It got worse. The very next day, I found my trash cans overturned, garbage scattered across my driveway. My mailbox was stuffed so full of flyers and nonsense that I couldn't even pull the mail out without tearing it. When I checked my backyard, someone had dumped a pile of old branches right across the lawn. It was all petty, but it was deliberate. And I had no doubt who was behind it. This time, though, I didn't just clean it up and move on. I took photos. I filed police reports. Every little stunt became part of a growing record of harassment. And while Karen kept digging her own grave, I quietly started talking to my neighbors. The ones who had once been afraid of her began opening up. Stories poured out. She fined me $200 for leaving my Christmas lights up until January 2nd. She threatened to tow my car because my guest parked in front of my own house. She came into my backyard once, without permission, just to measure my fence. The more I listened, the more I realized Karen's reign wasn't built on loyalty at all. It was built on fear. And that fear was crumbling. One neighbor, an older man named Richard, even told me something shocking. You know, technically the HOA was supposed to dissolve years ago. The bylaws said it had to be renewed by a community vote, but Karen never held one. She just kept acting like it was valid. Most of us didn't question it because, well, she scared people. That explained everything. The judge had already hinted at it, but now it was clear Karen's HOA wasn't just overreaching. It might not even exist anymore. I passed that information to Dan, who smiled like a kid on Christmas morning. Perfect. If that's true, not only will the judge dismiss her lawsuit, she might dissolve the HOA entirely. Karen's going to regret ever dragging you into court. As the final hearing approached, Karen's behavior became more erratic. She patrolled the neighborhood like a guard dog, clipboard in hand, snapping photos of houses, muttering to herself. She stopped waving at her loyal lackeys. She stopped smiling altogether. She even tried to corner me in my driveway one night. "You think you've won, don't you?" she hissed. Her hair was messy, her cardigan wrinkled, so unlike the polished image she usually projected. "But I built this community. Me. And I won't let you tear it down." I calmly pulled out my phone and hit record. "Karen, the judge told you to stop harassing me. Do you really want to add contempt of court to your list of problems?" Her eyes darted to the phone, and for a moment I thought she might actually lunge at me. But instead, she spat on the ground and stormed away. 2 weeks later, the final hearing arrived. The courtroom was packed this time, not just with HOA board members, but with regular neighbors too. Word had spread, and people wanted to see the outcome. Some of them even nodded at me in quiet support as I walked in. Karen sat rigid at the plaintiff's table, her lawyer looking like he hadn't slept in days. The judge wasted no time. After reviewing all documentation, it is clear to this court that the defendant's property is not within the jurisdiction of the HOA. Furthermore, the plaintiff has repeatedly attempted to enforce expired bylaws, issue fraudulent fines, and harass the defendant. This case is dismissed with prejudice. A murmur rippled through the room. Karen's jaw dropped. But the judge wasn't finished. She leaned forward, her tone sharper. "Additionally, given the irregularities in this HOA's operation, I am ordering an immediate review of the association itself. If it is found that bylaws were not properly renewed, this HOA may be dissolved entirely." Gasps filled the courtroom. Karen turned to her lawyer in panic. "You can't let her do this." But her lawyer just shook his head, defeated. The gavel came down one last time. Court is adjourned. Karen's empire was collapsing, and everyone in that room knew it. As I walked out, I caught the eyes of a few neighbors. For the first time since I'd moved in, they smiled at me, not forced, not polite, but genuine smiles. And I realized something. This wasn't just my victory. It was the whole neighborhood's. The moment the gavel came down, Karen's facade cracked. She didn't storm out this time. She stumbled. Her clipboard slipped from her hand and clattered onto the courtroom floor, papers spilling everywhere. Normally, Karen would have snapped her fingers and demanded one of her board lackeys pick it up for her. But not that day. Nobody moved. Not even her so-called allies. They just sat there, watching as she scrambled on her knees to gather her scattered papers. That image stuck with me. Karen, the queen of the cul-de-sac, reduced to crawling on the floor in front of everyone she had spent years intimidating. But if there's one thing I had learned by then, it was this. Karen never quit. She didn't know how. Even when she was beaten, she refused to admit it. That stubbornness made her dangerous. Over the next week, the entire neighborhood buzzed with rumors. People whispered in driveways, traded stories over fences, and for once, the topic wasn't about who forgot to edge their lawn or who left their garbage cans out an extra day. It was about Karen. "She's finished," I overheard one neighbor say at the grocery store. "About time," another replied. "She fined me $100 for a garden gnome." At first, the gossip gave me relief. Maybe, finally, people were seeing through her act. But Karen wasn't about to go quietly. The very next day, she plastered the neighborhood with flyers. Every mailbox, every door, even stapled to lampposts. In bold letters, it read, "Defend your community. The HOA is under attack by outsiders who want to destroy everything we've built. Without our rules, property values will plummet. Crime will skyrocket. We'll be living in chaos. Join me at the emergency board meeting this Friday to save our HOA." It would have been laughable if it weren't so pathetic. Crime skyrocketing? Because I didn't want to pay fake fines? Please. But Friday came, and curiosity got the better of me. I wasn't technically invited, but that didn't stop me from walking down to the clubhouse where Karen had gathered her dwindling army. Through the open windows, I could hear her voice, shrill, desperate. "They're trying to dissolve us," she cried. "Do you understand what that means? Without me, without this HOA, you'll all be at the mercy of freeloaders. People who don't care about standards. People who'll drag us all down." I peeked inside. The turnout was underwhelming. A dozen people maybe, and half of them looked bored, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. One brave soul raised their hand. "Karen, didn't the judge say our bylaws expired years ago?" Karen slammed her hand on the table. "Technicality, legal mumbo-jumbo. What matters is the spirit of the rules. We all agreed to live in a nice community, didn't we? Well, that doesn't happen by accident. It happens because of me, because of the HOA." Her voice cracked on that last word. For the first time, it didn't sound like authority. It sounded like fear. By the end of the meeting, people shuffled out without much enthusiasm. Some didn't even look at her. Karen's empire was crumbling, one disillusioned neighbor at a time. But like I said, a cornered animal bites. And Karen still had a few tricks up her sleeve. The next morning, I woke to the sound of hammering. When I stepped outside, I nearly laughed out loud. Karen and two of her most loyal lackeys were erecting a massive wooden sign at the entrance of the neighborhood. Painted in sloppy, uneven letters, it read, "HOA rules enforced here. Trespassers will be prosecuted." I pulled out my phone and took a picture. Dan nearly choked on his coffee when I sent it to him. "She put that up after the judge literally told her she has no jurisdiction," he said. "Unbelievable. This is going to help us more than anything." I thought the sign would be the peak of her desperation. I was wrong. 2 nights later, just past midnight, I heard a noise in my driveway. Peeking through the blinds, I caught sight of Karen herself. Yes, Karen, spray painting something on the pavement in front of my house. I ran outside, phone recording in hand. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted. She froze, paint can in hand, caught like a kid with her hand in the cookie jar. But instead of running, she straightened her back. "Marking your violations," she snapped. "You're lowering the standard of this community. Everyone needs to know." I pointed the phone directly at her. "The judge ordered you to stop harassing me. Keep going. You're handing me everything I need to bury your HOA for good." Her face twisted with rage. For a moment, I thought she might lunge at me, but instead, she threw the spray can on the ground and stormed off. The next day, I handed the footage to Dan. He grinned. "This is it. She just handed us contempt of court. When the judge sees this, it's over." But Karen wasn't done yet. She started showing up at people's doors, begging them to sign petitions to save the HOA. She cried on porches, ranted in driveways, even offered to waive fines if people supported her. But the more desperate she became, the more people backed away. One neighbor, Richard, the same man who'd told me about the expired bylaws, called me over one evening. "You've started something big," he said. "People aren't afraid of her anymore. They're angry. Some of us are even talking about filing our own complaints against her. For the first time since moving into the neighborhood, I felt a real sense of community. Not Karen's fake, rule-enforced version of community, but the genuine kind. People standing up for each other. When the final review hearing came around, the courtroom was packed again. Only this time, it was different. Neighbors filled the benches, but they weren't there to support Karen. They were there to watch her fall. The judge wasted no time. After reviewing the association's charter records and testimony, it is the court's finding that this HO has failed to renew its bylaws as required. Therefore, the HO has no legal standing. Effective immediately, the Homeowners Association of Maple Grove is dissolved. The room erupted. Gasps, murmurs, even a few cheers quickly hushed by the bailiff. Karen shot to her feet. "You can't do this. I built this community. You need me." The judge slammed the gavel. "Sit down, Mrs. Watkins. Your authority here is finished." Karen collapsed into her chair, white as a ghost. Her lawyer buried his face in his hands. It was over. The HO was gone. The fines were gone. The threats were gone. And Karen, the woman who had tried to sue me into submission, was nothing more than another homeowner, stripped of her imaginary crown. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Neighbors clapped me on the back, shook my hand, even thanked me. "You stood up to her," one said. "We've wanted to for years, but nobody had the guts." For the first time since moving in, I felt like I actually belonged. But as sweet as the victory was, I knew Karen wasn't done, not really. People like her never just give up. And sure enough, that very night, I saw her standing in her yard, staring across the street at me. No clipboard, no entourage. Just her, alone, glaring with a look that said one thing loud and clear. This isn't over. The first court appearance had been a victory. Small, maybe, but significant. The judge hadn't fully dismissed Karen's case yet, but he had made it clear that her so-called authority was on shaky ground. Most people in her position might have taken that as a warning, maybe even a cue to step back and reconsider. But not Karen. Karen wasn't built to admit defeat. She wasn't the kind of person who could accept being wrong, much less being told she had no power. For her, this wasn't just about my house anymore. This was about her pride, her control, her reputation as the iron-fisted president of Willow Creek Ho. So instead of backing down, she doubled down. The very next morning, I woke to the sound of hammering outside. When I opened my blinds, I saw 2 HO volunteers, probably bribed with promises of community spirit points, planting a giant wooden post right on the property line between my yard and the sidewalk. On it, they nailed a freshly painted sign that read in bold red letters, "Non-compliant property, fines pending." I nearly choked on my coffee. She had actually made a scarlet letter for my yard. I stormed outside in my pajamas, phone in hand to record everything. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" One of the men shrugged awkwardly. "Karen told us to put this up. Said it's required." Required by who? The HO has no jurisdiction here. This is harassment. Take it down right now, or I'm calling the police. They exchanged uneasy glances, then muttered something about just following orders before packing up their tools and leaving the sign in place. I stared at that monstrosity, blood boiling. My first instinct was to rip it out of the ground, but then I paused. No, not this time. Karen wanted me to react emotionally so she could paint me as the unreasonable one. Instead, I took photos from every angle, documented the entire incident, and sent it straight to Mr. Lawson. His response came within the hour. "Leave the sign up for now. This actually strengthens our counterclaim. Harassment, defamation, trespassing, you name it. She's digging her own grave." So I left it. Ugly as it was, it became Exhibit A in Karen's campaign of lunacy. But that was only the beginning. Over the next week, Karen ramped things up in ways I hadn't thought possible. She started mailing community newsletters to every house in the neighborhood, complete with a section called Hall of Shame. And guess whose address and photo were plastered at the top? Mine. According to her, I was a defiant homeowner undermining property values, and a danger to neighborhood integrity. She claimed I hosted wild parties, left garbage on my lawn, and even accused me of keeping dangerous animals. The wild parties? I was a single guy who barely had friends over once a month. Garbage on the lawn? I put my cans out once a week like everyone else. Dangerous animals? Unless she meant my 10-pound terrier who barked at squirrels, the accusation was laughable. Still, lies travel fast, and some neighbors started treating me differently. The family 2 doors down stopped letting their kids play near my yard. A retired couple who used to wave every morning now looked the other way when I walked past. Karen was winning the propaganda war, and she knew it. But not everyone was buying her nonsense. A few brave neighbors actually came by to offer quiet words of support. One evening, my next-door neighbor, a middle-aged man named Mark, knocked on my door. "Hey, just so you know, not all of us are swallowing Karen's garbage. She tried to pull the same stunt on me years ago, claimed my fence wasn't regulation height. I fought her and won, but she never forgot. You've just become her new target." That conversation lit a spark in me. Maybe Karen wasn't as invincible as she thought. Maybe, just maybe, the neighborhood was ready to see her for what she really was. But before I could rally any support, Karen pulled her boldest stunt yet. One Saturday morning, I came outside to find 2 uniformed code enforcement officers parked in front of my house. Karen stood beside them, clipboard in hand, grinning like the cat who caught the canary. "There he is," she said, pointing at me. "This is the property I reported. Violations everywhere. Unsafe conditions. Immediate action required." The officers approached me, serious expressions on their faces. "Sir, we've received complaints about hazardous conditions and zoning violations. We need to inspect the property." My jaw dropped. Hazardous? Violations? Are you kidding me? This is her doing. I pointed at Karen, who just folded her arms smugly. The officers exchanged a look. "We'll still need to check, sir. If you've got nothing to hide, this won't take long." So I let them in. I figured, fine, let's clear this up once and for all. For the next 30 minutes, they walked through every room, every hallway, even my backyard. And what did they find? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. My house was up to code in every way. When they emerged, one of them gave Karen a look of pure annoyance. "Ma'am, there are no violations here. Everything checks out." Karen sputtered, clearly unprepared for that outcome. But his lawn, his garage, his mailbox, none of those are code issues," the officer said flatly. "This property isn't in your HOA. Our hands are tied." And with that, they left. I couldn't resist grinning at her. Strike two. Karen's face twisted into something between rage and desperation. For the first time, I saw cracks in her confidence. Later that day, I got a call from Mr. Lawson. "Good news. Those code enforcement visits? We can add that to the harassment list. She's abusing municipal resources now." This is exactly what judges hate to see. It was becoming clearer by the day. Karen wasn't just going to lose in court, she was going to implode. But before we got there, she had one more card to play. Something so over the top, so outrageous, it made everything she'd done before look tame. Because if Karen couldn't control me with fines, signs, or smear campaigns, she was going to try to control me with fear. And when I say fear, I mean it. One night, just as I was settling into bed, I heard a loud crash outside. My dog went berserk, barking at the front window. I rushed over and saw my mailbox lying in pieces on the sidewalk, the post splintered as if it had been rammed by a truck. And standing across the street in the glow of a street lamp was Karen, clipboard in hand. Watching. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. That was her message. This isn't over. But she had just made her biggest mistake yet. Because now, it wasn't just a neighborhood spat. It was vandalism. A crime. And I was done playing defense. The sight of my shattered mailbox lying on the ground stayed burned in my mind long after that night. Pieces of wood scattered across the sidewalk, jagged edges where the post had snapped. It wasn't just vandalism, it was a statement. and the fact that Karen stood across the street watching like some sort of deranged sentinel made it clear. She wasn't done, and she wasn't planning on stopping anytime soon. For a moment, I just stood there in disbelief, phone in hand. My dog barked furiously, growling at the window as if he understood the menace in the air. I snapped out of my haze and did the only logical thing. I started recording. I zoomed in on Karen, clipboard clutched tightly in her hands, her smug little smirk visible even from that distance. Then I panned back to my mailbox, wrecked beyond repair. "Got you," I muttered under my breath. The next morning, I called Mr. Lawson. I sent him the video and photos I'd taken. His reply came almost instantly. "This is gold. Vandalism, intimidation, harassment. It's no longer just a civil matter. We're bringing the police in." Part of me hesitated. Reporting Karen to the police felt extreme. But then again, hadn't she crossed every possible line already? Fake fines, public shaming, harassing me with code enforcement, and now destruction of my property. Enough was enough. That afternoon, a patrol car pulled up in front of my house. I explained everything to the officer, showed him the video, and handed over the broken remains of my mailbox as evidence. He took it all seriously. "We'll open an investigation. If she was the one who did this, we'll find out." Karen must have seen the police car because not an hour later, she was outside again, storming up to my yard like she owned the place. "Are you insane?" she shrieked, jabbing a finger toward me. "Calling the police on your neighbors? That's not how we handle things in this community." I crossed my arms, holding my ground. Destroying someone's mailbox isn't handling things. It's a federal crime, Karen. You messed up. Her face went red, and for once, she didn't have a snappy comeback. She just sputtered, her eyes darting around as if searching for backup from the neighbors who'd once supported her. But nobody came. People peeked from behind their curtains, some even standing on porches, but no one rushed to her defense. Finally, she hissed, "You'll regret this," before storming back to her house. That was the moment I knew her empire was crumbling. Over the next week, things got worse for her, not for me. Word spread quickly about the police visit. The same neighbors she'd poisoned against me began to question what else she'd been lying about. Mark, my next-door neighbor, stopped by again one evening. "She's losing it," he said, shaking his head. "I heard she tried to convince the board to use HOA funds for her legal fees. People are furious. Some of us are even talking about voting her out." I couldn't believe it. After months of enduring her reign of terror, the neighborhood was finally starting to see through her act. But Karen wasn't going down without a fight. At the next pre-trial hearing, she showed up more defiant than ever, dragging her 2 board members with her. Only this time, they looked less like loyal lieutenants and more like hostages forced to attend against their will. She wasted no time launching into another tirade. "Your Honor, the defendant is a menace to our community. He called the police on me for no reason. He's disrupting the peace, and he refuses to follow the standards that every other respectable homeowner abides by." Mr. Lawson calmly stood and slid a flash drive across the table. "Your Honor, we have video evidence showing the plaintiff standing across the street immediately after the defendant's mailbox was destroyed. We also have police reports confirming an investigation is underway. This is not about community standards. This is about targeted harassment." The judge's face hardened as he watched the footage on the monitor. He didn't say anything right away, but the silence was deafening. Karen shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her bravado slipping just a little. "Ms. Mitchell," the judge finally said, his voice icy, "if this video is accurate, it appears you were present at the scene of property damage. Do you deny being there?" Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I was just walking. I happened to be outside. That doesn't mean I did anything." The judge leaned back. "Perhaps not, but combined with your repeated attempts to find the defendant, your harassment of him through newsletters, and your misuse of city code enforcement, it paints a troubling picture. I strongly suggest you tread carefully. This court does not take kindly to frivolous suits or intimidation tactics." Her cheeks flushed crimson. She tried to argue, But her own lawyer tugged her sleeve, whispering something urgently. For once, she stayed quiet. When the hearing ended, Lawson turned to me with a small grin. "She's hanging herself, piece by piece. Keep your cool a little longer. By the time this goes to final hearing, she'll have no credibility left." And he was right. Over the next month, Karen's behavior spiraled further out of control. She started patrolling the neighborhood at all hours, clipboard in hand, peering into yards with a flashlight. Neighbors who once ignored her began complaining. A few even filed their own reports about her trespassing. I'll never forget the night I heard shouting down the street and stepped outside to see Karen arguing with a young couple over the color of their Christmas lights. "They're not white," she barked. "Only warm white is allowed. This is a disgrace." The couple just laughed at her and slammed the door in her face. It was surreal watching her authority dissolve in real time. The same people who used to nod obediently at her rules were now rolling their eyes, muttering under their breath, or outright mocking her. And then came the whole board meeting that would change everything. Mark invited me to attend, saying, "Trust me, you'll want to see this." I walked into the community clubhouse expecting another round of Karen theatrics. What I got instead was a mutiny. The room was packed with homeowners, many holding copies of the newsletter Karen had weaponized against me. The tension was palpable. Karen stood at the front, clipboard clutched like a lifeline, trying to restore order. "This meeting will come to order." First item, addressing the defendant's continued refusal to comply with HOA standards. She didn't get any further. A woman from the back shouted, "He's not in the HOA, Karen. Stop wasting our time." A murmur of agreement swept the room. Another man stood up. "We didn't elect you to harass people who aren't even part of our association. You've dragged us into a lawsuit that's going to cost thousands in legal fees." "For what?" Karen's face tightened. "I'm protecting our property values." "No," the man shot back. "You're protecting your ego." The room erupted in applause. Karen banged her clipboard against the podium, desperate to regain control. "Enough. I am the president, and what I say goes." But then one of her own board members stood up. The balding man who'd always flanked her in court. His voice was tired but firm. "Karen, we're done. You've gone too far. We're calling for a vote of no confidence." The clubhouse went silent. Karen's mouth dropped open. "You can't do that. I'm the president." "Not anymore," he said. "All in favor of removing Karen Mitchell as president of the Willow Creek HOA?" Hands shot up across the room. Dozens of them. More than enough to pass. I sat there, stunned, as Karen's reign crumbled right in front of me. Her face turned ghostly pale, then flushed with rage. She screamed, "This isn't over. You'll all regret this. He'll destroy everything we built." She pointed directly at me, spittle flying from her lips. But nobody listened. The room had spoken. Karen had been dethroned. As I left the meeting, Mark clapped me on the back. "Told you it'd be worth coming." I smiled, relief washing over me. But deep down, I knew Karen wasn't done. People like her never went quietly. And sure enough, I was right. Because while she'd lost her title, she still had her lawsuit. And she was going to drag it all the way to the bitter end. But the end was coming faster than she realized. Because at the final court hearing, the judge wasn't just going to dismiss her case. He was going to dissolve her entire HOA on the spot. And I was going to be there to watch it happen. The final court date loomed like a storm on the horizon. By then, Karen had already been voted out as HOA president, humiliated in front of her neighbors, and investigated by the police for vandalism. Most people would have cut their losses, but Karen wasn't like most people. For her, this wasn't just about fines or rules or even the HOA anymore. This was about pride, about control, about refusing to let go of the empire she'd built, even as it collapsed around her. I spent the night before the hearing pacing my living room, flipping through the thick binder of documents Mr. Lawson had prepared. Every page was a nail in Karen's coffin: my deed, zoning maps, county records, photos of her harassment campaigns, copies of her newsletters, the police report, the video of her loitering near my destroyed mailbox. Each piece told the same story. Karen wasn't protecting her community. She was persecuting me. When morning came, I barely slept. I dressed in my best suit, fed my dog, and drove to the courthouse with a mixture of dread and anticipation buzzing through me. Mr. Lawson met me outside, as calm as ever. "You ready for the end of this circus?" he asked with a faint smile. I let out a nervous laugh. "More than ready." We walked inside together. And there she was. Karen sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by the same two board members who had once been her lapdogs. Only now, they looked more like reluctant captives, forced to endure one last round of her obsession. She wore her signature navy blue suit, pearls gleaming under the fluorescent lights, clipboard clutched like it held divine truth. Her face was pinched with fury, but when she saw me, she smirked. "You're going down today," she whispered as I passed. I ignored her, but inside, I smiled, because I knew the exact opposite was about to happen. The judge entered the courtroom, his expression tired but sharp. He'd seen us twice already, and I could tell from the way he rubbed his temples that he wasn't thrilled to be seeing us again. "All right," he began, flipping through the thick file. "This is the matter of Willow Creek Homeowners Association versus Mr. Jameson. We've already had preliminary hearings. Today, we'll hear final arguments before I make a ruling." Karen shot to her feet before her lawyer could even rise. "Your Honor, thank you for hearing us today. I'd like to make it clear that this man," she jabbed a finger at me, "has flagrantly disregarded the community standards that keep our neighborhoods safe and beautiful. He has refused to join the HOA, ignored repeated violation notices, and cost us thousands in legal fees. If you do not enforce our authority, our entire community will fall apart." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Ms. Mitchell, you're no longer president of the HOA, correct?" Karen's jaw clenched. "That's irrelevant. The bylaws answer the question." She swallowed. "Correct. But that doesn't mean I can't represent them. They need me." A murmur of laughter rippled through the small gallery. Even her own board members shifted uncomfortably. The judge scribbled something down, then nodded toward Lawson. "Defense?" Lawson stood gracefully, buttoning his jacket. "Your Honor, what Ms. Mitchell has presented is not a case. It's a crusade. My client is not, nor has he ever been, a member of the Willow Creek HOA. His property deed, which we have submitted into evidence, explicitly excludes him from their jurisdiction. Despite this, Ms. Mitchell and her associates have subjected him to months of harassment, fabricated fines, defamatory newsletters, even vandalism." He gestured to the monitor, where he queued up the video. The screen flickered to life, showing my broken mailbox and Karen standing across the street, clipboard in hand. The courtroom went silent. The judge leaned forward, frowning deeply. "Ms. Mitchell, is this you?" Karen's face turned crimson. Yes, but I didn't do anything." "I was just." "You were just what?" The judge pressed. "I was walking, observing. He probably destroyed it himself to make me look bad." Gasps and whispers erupted from the gallery. Even her own lawyer buried his face in his hands. Lawson didn't even flinch. "Your Honor, beyond the video, we have police reports confirming an investigation into Ms. Mitchell's conduct, along with testimony from multiple neighbors about her behavior. This is not about community standards. This is about one person abusing her position of power to bully someone who never agreed to be under her authority." The judge sat back, steepling his fingers. He was quiet for a long time, scanning the documents, flipping through my deed, glancing at the HOA bylaws Karen had submitted. Finally, he set everything down. "Ms. Mitchell," he said slowly, "what I see here is an overzealous former HOA president who has overstepped her authority in every conceivable way. You find a homeowner who was never under your jurisdiction. You harassed him through newsletters. You misused city resources to harass him with code enforcement. And now there is credible evidence suggesting you engaged in intimidation and possible vandalism." Karen shot to her feet, voice shrill. "You don't understand. Without me, this community will fall apart. People like him ruin neighborhoods. Enough." The judge's voice cracked like a whip. "Sit down, Ms. Mitchell. or I'll hold you in contempt." The room went silent. Karen slowly lowered herself back into her chair, trembling with rage. The judge turned to Lawson. "Counselor, based on the evidence, I am prepared to rule." I held my breath. "This case is dismissed with prejudice. The Willow Creek Hoe has no authority over the defendant's property. Furthermore," he paused, glaring at Karen, "given the plaintiff's conduct, I find sufficient grounds to dissolve the Willow Creek Homeowners Association effective immediately. Its bylaws are void, its enforcement powers revoked." The room erupted in shocked gasps. Karen's mouth fell open. "You can't do that. That's my hoe, my community." "It's not yours anymore," the judge said firmly. "Court is adjourned." He banged the gavel. I sat there stunned, hardly believing what I had just heard. Not only had I won, but Karen's entire kingdom had crumbled in a single sentence. Karen, on the other hand, lost it. She leapt to her feet, screaming, "This isn't fair. You're all against me. This neighborhood will regret this." Her lawyer tried to calm her down, but she shoved him aside, storming out of the courtroom like a hurricane of pearls and hairspray. I just sat there, breathing for what felt like the first time in months. It was over. Truly over. Lawson leaned over and whispered, "Congratulations. You didn't just beat her, you ended her reign entirely." As we left the courthouse, I couldn't help but glance back one last time. Karen was in the hallway, pacing like a caged animal, shouting at anyone who'd listen. But nobody was listening anymore. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt free. But little did I know, even after the hoe was dissolved, Karen wasn't finished. Because people like her never really stop. And that final chapter of her downfall? That was still to come. When that gavel struck for the last time, I thought it was over. I thought Karen's empire had collapsed. The nightmare had ended, and I could finally go back to living my life in peace. But with people like Karen, it's never that simple. The weeks following the court ruling were surreal. News spread quickly across the neighborhood. One day, people were checking their mailboxes for Karen's latest list of absurd violations, and the next, there was no hoe at all. For many, it was like being freed from a tyrant they didn't even realize had such a tight grip on them. Some neighbors celebrated openly. I remember Mr. Thompson, the retired veteran 2 houses down, throwing a barbecue with banners that read "No More Hoe" strung across his fence. Families came out, kids played in yards again, and for the first time in years, the atmosphere felt alive instead of suffocated. But not everyone was happy. A small group of Karen's loyalists muttered that without rules, the neighborhood would fall apart. They whispered about rising crime, sinking property values, chaos on every lawn. Yet weeks passed, and nothing happened. Yards stayed neat. People still painted their fences, mowed their lawns, and waved hello to each other. Turns out, community pride didn't come from Karen's fines. It came from people simply caring about where they lived. But while most of us moved forward, Karen, she unraveled. I'd occasionally spot her wandering the streets, clipboard still in hand, though now it was just a prop, a relic of her lost power. She'd stop in front of houses, scribble furiously, then march away muttering under her breath. Sometimes she'd yell across the street at kids riding bikes without helmets or at people parking slightly crooked in their driveways. But nobody paid attention anymore. She was a ghost haunting her own kingdom. Then came the retaliation. One morning, I woke up to find spray paint scrawled across my garage door. "Traitor." The letters dripped bright red, jagged and angry. I didn't need to guess who was behind it. The police came, filed another report, and this time I noticed something different in their tone. They weren't treating Karen like a quirky neighborhood busybody anymore. They were treating her like a suspect. A week later, she was caught on a neighbor's security camera slashing the tires of a minivan parked slightly on the curb. That was the breaking point. The police didn't just warn her this time, they arrested her. I'll never forget the sight. Karen in handcuffs, pearls askew, screaming about conspiracies as she was led into the back of a cruiser. Neighbors stood on their lawns, watching in stunned silence. Some shook their heads, others whispered, but nobody stepped forward to defend her. Her fall from grace was complete. But here's the thing. Even in defeat, Karen didn't see herself as wrong. She posted on community forums until she was banned about how she was the last line of defense against degeneracy. She sent angry letters to the city council, demanding they reinstate the HOA. She even tried to start a new association, but nobody joined. She was finished. For me, life slowly returned to normal. The stress that had consumed me for months finally began to lift. I fixed my mailbox, repainted my garage, and planted new flowers in the yard. Neighbors who once avoided me now stopped by to chat, some even apologizing for not standing up to Karen sooner. One evening, as the sun set over Willow Creek, I sat on my porch with a cold drink, watching kids ride by on scooters, hearing laughter instead of shouting. For the first time since moving in, I felt like I truly belonged. I realized something important. Neighborhoods don't need dictators. They need neighbors. Still, there was one last twist to the story. Months later, I received a letter in the mail, not from Karen, but from her lawyer. Inside was a notice that Karen was selling her house. She couldn't handle the humiliation, the stares, the whispers every time she walked outside. The community she once ruled over had become her cage, and she wanted out. And so, just like that, Karen was gone. Her house sat on the market for months, because word about her antics had spread far beyond our cul-de-sac. Eventually, it sold to a quiet young couple who planted sunflowers in the front yard and never once mentioned bylaws or violations. It was poetic, really. The house that had once been the command center of fear became just another home, warm, inviting, ordinary. As for me, I learned more than I ever thought I would from the whole ordeal. I learned that bullies only win when people stay silent. That standing up, even when you're outnumbered, matters. And that sometimes justice really does prevail. Karen tried to sue me for not being in her HOA. She tried to bleed me dry, humiliate me, break me. But in the end, she lost everything. Her title, her power, her reputation, even her home. And all it took was one judge willing to see through her lies, and one neighbor unwilling to bow. Even now, years later, when I tell the story, people shake their heads in disbelief. Did that really happen? They ask. Yes, it did. And every time I pull into my driveway, no fines waiting in the mailbox, no newsletters condemning my yard, no pearl-clad tyrant watching from across the street, I smile. Because freedom, once earned, is sweeter than anything else. Karen may have dissolved into the past, but the lesson remains. Neighborhoods thrive on respect, not control. And sometimes, the loudest bully in the room is just one gavel strike away from silence.